Did you know that most people buying an iPad make at least one of these iPad buying mistakes? That means that they either spend more money than they need to upfront, or even worse, they have to upgrade after a year or two because the iPad that they bought wasn't the right fit. It makes a lot of sense. For a lot of people, this could be their first tablet or at least their first iPad, and they may not know what to look for in order to make the right choice. One of the things that confuses a lot of buyers is the idea of a laminated versus non-laminated display. In a non-laminated display, like on the iPad 8, the cover and touch glass are separated from the LCD layer with a visible air gap. In a fully laminated display, like the iPad Air 4 and the iPad Pro, all three layers are laminated into a single piece. When you look at the actual image on the screen, you'll see that on a non-laminated display, the image looks like it's under a piece of glass, whereas on a fully laminated display, the image looks like it's right at the top of the display. Now, if you're just watching content or surfing the web, it's not really going to make a big difference, but if you're using an Apple Pencil, the fully laminated display does provide a better user experience. Because there is no air gap, when you draw on a fully laminated display, the tip of the Apple Pencil looks like it's touching the content, whereas on a non-laminated display, you're more likely to notice a separation. Non-laminated displays also have a little more of a hollow sound to them when the Apple Pencil hits them. It's definitely not the end of the world by any means, but it is part of the user experience. Now, ultimately, you can definitely draw and take notes on both, but if you're a serious artist or want the best writing experience, you're going to like having a fully laminated display. One downside to keep in mind when it comes to a fully laminated display has to do with the replacement cost. With a non-laminated display, since there is separation between the layers, if you crack the cover glass and need to have it replaced, it's relatively inexpensive. With a fully laminated display, even if you just crack the cover glass and you didn't break the display itself, the entire component has to be replaced, which is more expensive. Now make sure that you take into account what you plan on doing with your iPad and then choose the display type that would work best for you. I try to answer as many questions as I can in the comment section, so if you have any questions based on your specific use case, go ahead and ask. Another mistake that people make is automatically buying the most expensive iPad. If you're just swimming in money and it doesn't really matter, then by all means, buy the most expensive iPad. It's going to be great, and you're never going to have to worry about what if. For the rest of the world, I only want you to spend money if you're getting features and benefits that are going to be valuable to you. If you're buying an iPad for browsing the web, doing social media, or maybe just to have in the kitchen to look up recipes, it probably doesn't make sense to get the M1 12.9-inch iPad Pro over the iPad 8. Unless you're doing it for the larger display, that's a real world benefit. Then I would probably still suggest that you look at an older 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which would give you the benefits of a larger display with plenty of processing power for what you need. On the other hand, if you're a very demanding user who needs the best display, more processing power, more RAM, and faster connectivity, then it makes sense to invest in a higher end iPad. On the other side of the coin, I see people buying the cheapest iPad. And I'm not necessarily talking about the lowest tier iPad. It could actually be buying the lower internal storage option of the model that they already chose. I would rather you buy a little more than you need in terms of features and storage, rather than not buy enough. If you've watched any other video of mine, you know that I finish every one of them with buy it nice or buy it twice. So I really hope my reviews and comparisons help you buy products that are within your budget and work well for what you need now and in the future. I talked about this other mistake briefly in my previous point, but one of the most common mistakes that I see people make is not getting enough storage. In case you don't know, the internal storage on the iPad isn't upgradable, and you can't add any with a micro SD like you can with some other brands. So it's very important that you get enough storage. You don't want to have to upgrade a perfectly good iPad that still works great for everything that you need just because you ran out of storage. Apple is very intentional about where they place their breaking points for storage. For the most part, there are two tiers with an entry-level model and then another option with 4 times the storage. So for example, with the iPad 8, it comes with 32 gigs, or there's another option for 128. The iPad Air 4 comes with 64 gigs or 256. When you get to the iPad Pro, there are a lot more options because there are different types of professionals who have different requirements. For people who edit videos on their iPad, there's been a major update with LumaFusion 3.0. So you can now edit directly off of an external SSD without having to copy the files onto your iPad. I have a dedicated video almost finished about this, and I'll link to it at the end of this one as soon as it's done. The next mistake I see people make is overestimating how much processing power and RAM they need. Yes, as you move through the models, you're getting more RAM and more powerful processors. And the M1 iPads took a giant leap forward, and they're incredibly powerful. But I bring this up only to say that the vast majority of users aren't pushing their iPads anywhere near their limits. And the ones that do, most of the time, are already aware of their higher needs. From a performance standpoint, for what I do, I don't notice a meaningful difference between the iPad 8 and the iPad Pro. If you're watching content, surfing the web, using productivity apps, and even playing games, the iPad 8 has plenty of processing power. I play PUBG and Call of Duty Mobile, and I've had no issues. Now, if you're playing extremely demanding games or if you're editing very challenging video footage, then you'll definitely benefit from the improved performance of the more capable chips on the higher end iPads. So make sure that you only upgrade for performance if you actually need it. The next mistake I want to talk about has to do with audio, and this is going to come down to how you want to use your iPad. As you go from the iPad 8 to the iPad Air 4, you're getting a significant improvement in the quality of the speakers, and you're also getting stereo speakers. When you go from the iPad Air 4 to the iPad Pro, then again, you're getting another noticeable improvement in how full and immersive the sound is. So this is a case where if you actually plan on using your speakers, each jump in model actually offers a meaningful advantage. Another point to consider is that of all of these models, only the iPad 8 has a 3.5mm headphone jack, so you can use a wired headphone or gaming headset without needing an adapter. The next mistake I see is buying an iPad that's too big. A lot of times people are enamored by the larger display when they're shopping online or even at the store. In concept, bigger is always better, and in person, the larger display just looks awesome. But when you get the larger display and maybe add a Magic Keyboard, you are giving up some of the portability that's so nice to have with an iPad. So decide whether portability or the absolute largest display is a priority for you. Now there's another side to this, and that's getting an iPad that's too small. There are some tasks that are just easier to do on a larger display. Things like photo and video editing, where you may have different tools and bins taking up some of the screen real estate, or where it's nice to have a larger timeline. If you're an artist, you may like a larger canvas to work with, and if you take a lot of handwritten notes, again, you may prefer a larger display. Another use case where a larger display is nicer is when using the iPad as an additional display for your Mac, iMac, or MacBook. This is an included feature called Sidecar, and you can do this wirelessly or tethered. It's something that I do pretty much every day, and I appreciate having the 12.9-inch iPad Pro for a larger display. If you want to learn more about that feature, check out that video at the end of this one. Another mistake that I see some people make is thinking that they always have to buy a brand new iPad. A lot of users don't need all the features or performance that's offered by the latest model. They would get just as much out of their iPad with a used one. Depending on where you live and what the resale market looks like, you can get some really good deals, get more internal storage, and still save some money by buying used. The next mistake people make is believing all the marketing hype. Apple marketing is legendary, and every new feature and benefit is beautifully presented in their exquisitely produced events. Now, a lot of the features are great, but at the same time, make sure that you actually need the new features when you're going to spend more money. For example, 5G is awesome if you plan on getting a dedicated data plan for your iPad and you have good coverage in your area, but it's completely useless if you don't. A Thunderbolt port is fantastic if you're transferring a lot of large files from and to your iPad Pro, but it offers no meaningful advantage for users who don't need these faster transfer speeds or access to something like a $6,000 Pro Display XDR. The next mistake buyers make is expecting their iPad to completely replace a laptop. Now this actually comes down to how you use your laptop. So if you're just using it to surf the web, working with web-based application, watching content, doing email, social media, that kind of stuff, then an iPad will work great. But if you need desktop applications, that's not something that iPadOS currently supports. So even though we have chips that are powerful enough to run those apps, it's not currently an option. All of those apps would need to be ported to support a touch UI before anything like that would be possible. Now, speaking of replacing a laptop, at the very least, you're most likely looking at a keyboard case. Now, there are a ton of options at various price points, but if you're looking at the higher end models like the Magic Keyboard and then various options from Logitech, make sure that you factor that into the cost of the device. If you're going to use the Apple Pencil, then you're looking at either $100 for the first generation or $130 for the second gen. So again, make sure that you have that in your budget. I thought of a bonus mistake that I wanted to share with you, and that's not thinking long-term when choosing an iPad. This is going to be different for each person, but most people aren't replacing their iPad every year or even every 2 or 3 years. Now, I've said this in other videos, but my iPad Air 2 from 2014 is still fully supported by Apple and it works great. I use it for every video. Now, this touches on a few points that I already mentioned, but if you keep your iPad for, let's just say 5 years, and the consideration is whether to invest an extra $200, we're really only looking at $40 per year. Now, I know that you're not making payments on this, so you have to come up with all the money up front, but there are really two ways to look at this. Some people want to keep their iPad for as long as possible in order to get the most out of their money, and they literally keep their device until it's unusable. Other users use their iPad for 2 or 3 years, sell it while it still has value, and then use that money to upgrade. Both approaches have merit, and your choice of model and storage size will be impacted by the approach that works best for you. Hopefully this video was helpful. Click on my face to subscribe and then watch one of these videos. You know what I always say? Buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.